we were helping people, human beings, to create and grow their businesses, but we didn't treat them like that. When I would go into the office, people would talk about what they did last weekend, what they were doing the next weekend, and how much money we could get out of people. When I had that moment with the cab driver, I went back and I left my job. The big mistake leaders make is they expect people to add value before they feel valued. I think any human being, no matter where you are, can relearn how to be a human being to other human beings. And what I mean by that is,
before we jump into this episode, I'd love to invite you to be a part of the community where you can listen to more content to help you be a smarter, stronger, and better equipped, successful leader. All you have to do is hit that subscribe button. I would love and appreciate your support. It's amazing to me to watch the community grow and read all of your comments each and every week. I can't wait to go on the journey with you. Thank you so much, and it means the world to me. Welcome to the Impact Driven Leader Podcast. This is your host, Tyler Dickerhoof. On today's episode, I'm joined by Zach Mercurio. Zach is known for his expertise in purposeful leadership and meaningful work. He is a research fellow at the Center for Meaning and Purpose, which I never knew existed. I'm glad I did, at Colorado State University. Go Rams, right? Author of The Invisible Leader and a regular keynote speaker to organizations of all scopes, speaking about the need for organizational purpose and so much deeper. Zach, thanks for being here, man.
Tyler, thanks for having me. Thanks for creating this space.
Yeah. So I want to go in your book, The Invisible Leader. You share a life-defining moment as you describe it. And so I would love for you to kind of talk about, set the story for that life-defining cab ride.
Yeah. And it actually wasn't a cab ride. It was literally in a parking lot. I was supposed to be on a sales call because I was on my first job out of college in radio advertising sales. Now, I had been educated for success, which means I was educated to acquire and achieve, right? So I was educated for the starting salary I would get, not for who I was, what kind of impact that I wanted to make. And so I found myself in this job in advertising in Washington, D.C., that was a meaningful job in the sense that we were helping people, human beings, to create and grow their businesses. But we didn't treat them like that. When I would go into the office, people would talk about what they did last weekend, what they were doing the next weekend, and how much money we could get out of people.
The corporate America ethos.
It's against that backdrop that I was in this parking lot in Washington, D.C., and a cab driver pulled up and got out of the cab, and he said to me, "Hey, how's it going?" You don't, if you live in DC, if you live on the East Coast, you generally don't make small talk with strangers on weekdays. So this was odd. But he got out and said, "How's it going?" And I grumbled something that it was embarrassing. I said, "Is it almost the weekend yet?" And it was Tuesday. I had started saying what I had been taught to say, how I had been taught to think about life, to live for 2/7 of your life, the days that begin with the letter S. And immediately I was embarrassed when I said it, but I said, "Hey, is it the weekend yet? Can't wait to get to the weekend." And I said, "How's it going for you?" And his face lit up, huge smile. And he said, "Oh man, it's great. Can't get better than this." And he started telling me about the person he picked up prior to me. He said, "I love this job. I'm people's friends they don't talk to anymore. Their parents they don't talk to if they're missing when they're here away from them. When someone flies in from another country, I am the United States to them. I love it." And I remember he put a cigarette out and he got into his cab and he drove away. And I had this thought like, "Oh man, I want to be a cab driver." But it really wasn't that. I was infatuated with the fact that he didn't tell me what he did. He didn't talk about what he did. He didn't talk about how he was doing. He talked about the people he impacted through what he was doing. And I've spent the rest of my life trying to understand, how do we help people to take that perspective, to think about their contribution and their impact, and also create environments that make it easier for people to see the impact and contribution they make.
Okay, so can you bridge a little bit of that gap and describe, how you went from that moment to the work you do now, but really, let me frame that in a little bit, kind of this idea of focusing on the positive, the positive psychology and how that kind of is again a part of that transformation journey, that steps that you took.
Yeah. So when I had that moment with the cab driver, I went back and I left my job, much to the chagrin of everybody around me.
Okay.
Right?
Like instantly,
what are you doing?
or like in the next week?
I put in my 2 weeks notice within the next month of that moment. And what I then did was I wanted to make sure no one ended up like me. So I actually started applying for grad programs in adult education in higher education. And I went and got my master's at Colorado State University in adult education. And then I stayed there doing training and development and coaching for students on how to flip the script and start thinking about why you are, the impact you make through what you do. I wanted to eradicate the question, what are you doing with your life? And replace that with how is what you're going to do with your life going to impact other people?
Yeah.
And I spent 8 years in higher education in that mission. And then what happened is that those people started graduating and going into companies and organizations, and they started calling me and saying, we desperately need this. One of the things that I've often reflected on in my time in higher education and just in human development in general is that in good architectural design, form follows function. We would never build a building if we tried to, just design it without understanding what it was for. We do it with people all the time. We tell people to develop the form of their lives and their career without helping them understand their function and helping them see that they have a function, that they have a purpose, that they matter. And inevitably we get this tension, right? Whether it's the tension that I faced in my early life crisis or the tension in a midlife crisis, just also known as stagnation, that tension between form and function will inevitably arise. And so people were seeing that in the workplaces they were going into. I realized, wow, I could study this. So I got my PhD in organizational learning, performance, and change, and started studying what makes work meaningful. And then I'm back out in organizations now, making sure people experience meaningfulness through experiencing mattering. Now, you asked, how does the positive fit in?
Yeah.
Human beings and all organisms gravitate towards regenerative energy and away from extracting energy. It's a basic law.
Okay.
A plant, if you come to Colorado in the end of the summer, you could put a time-lapse video camera up on a sunflower and you will see it following the sun. It's called heliotropism. It's the principle that we are regenerated by positive energy and away from extractive energy. And so when we are helping people to see their purpose, when we're helping people to understand how they matter, it's not that everything is great. That's toxic positivity. The word positive and positive psychology means, are we choosing a productive, growth-oriented response that results in flourishing and thriving? Are we regenerating energy, or are we extracting the energy we need to encounter life and work? And that is the crux of the work that I do.
Okay, so just to put something around this, could I say that you believe at a cellular level, having positive energy has an impact on us and those around us?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, for example, every organism that ceases to positively contribute to its environment in some way dies. And eventually, and this idea of psychological languishing, when we're seeing burnout rates, we're seeing people who are disengaging, we're seeing isolation, we're seeing loneliness. All those things are, the inevitable byproducts of people withdrawing or acting out in desperation because they feel insignificant to the environment around them. When we don't fulfill like our inherent built-in need to contribute to the environment around us, we tend to psychologically languish.
So part of this, and a lot of this comes into different beliefs and different alignments, but if we use the universality of the universe And we talk about this, the idea of positive belief, and people talk about manifestation and belief. Again, I want to center on this so that way we can move forward and really understand how we positively get there. And again, through your work, through your study, through, your interaction with people, really seeing this come to fruition, I'm gathering.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can try it. Instead of looking at your phone tomorrow and saying, what do I have to do today? Ask yourself, how is what I'm going to do today going to impact other people? Try it for a week.
Yeah.
Instead of going into your next conversation being like, what am I going to get from this person? And ask yourself, how can I use my strengths to improve that person's life and condition? And try it and see what happens. You will see the meaning that has always been there. I mean, a lot of people think that their purpose is out there waiting to be found, but your purpose is really right where you are, waiting to be acknowledged. It's just that our mind's focus is on things that extract our energy versus regenerate our energy. For example, in the last 30 days, have you thought about, to the audience out here, how many times have you thought about this question? When is the last moment when I experienced the greatest amount of purpose? Thought about it, brought it to your mind. Now, many people, if I'm in a room of 100 people, people say maybe one or two. But if I say, how many of you all thought about something that stressed you out over the past month? Everybody will raise their hand, right? So is the thought that you have extracting energy, which that thought about what's stressing us out, what do I have to do, what do I have to get through, or is it regenerating energy? And most of our time, we spend our mental energy and mental chatter on thoughts that extract energy, and we behave in ways that extract energy.
So we're going to nerd out for a moment because I want to get deeper. Okay. I admit, and I tell my kids this. So I have teenage kids, and even my son yesterday is like, hey, Dad, does a suspension show up on your permanent record in high school? Now, he's not about to be suspended. I was suspended in high school. I'm like, I don't know, dude. I still made it to Cornell, so I have no clue. But one of the classes that I failed in college was psychology. I admit it. I understand it, why I failed. And one of it is I just didn't do the work. Okay. So that to then come into this, and maybe this is exact reason, is break down how this, I guess, new age or almost this different approach to psychology, positive psychology, differs from that of traditional psychology.
Yeah. Well, it's pretty easy. I mean, if you were wanting to learn how to play golf, would you study somebody who sucked at golf? Or would you study someone who's really good at golf?
Yeah. Okay. So then why do we do that? Why do we do that as a practice? Yeah, I mean, we study the Tiger Woods, we study those greats, right?
So if you were wanting to improve the human condition, would you study everything that's wrong with the human condition and focus on how to prevent those things, or would you study what's best about human beings and how to manifest those things?
You would think
right?
best,
so,
right?
Exactly. So how positive psychology differs is that previous modes of psychology is focused on a disease model of functioning. How do we make sure we don't become diseased, right? So it's preventative and it's reactive. Positive psychology is how do we ensure the environment manifests human flourishing? So what's best about the human being and how do we get there? It doesn't mean that we don't need people to study what's wrong. Really deeply, we do, desperately. But again, that's only one side of the equation. We're missing all this data on what contributes to human flourishing and human thriving. I mean, and this has implications beyond the realm of psychology. If you're studying psychology, sure. If you're a leader of a team and your team is not collaborating, what's your first instinct? Do you go in and say, hey, why aren't we collaborating? Well, what kind of data is that going to give you? It's going to give you all the data on the things that people are not doing, versus if you go into that team and you say, hey, when is a time when we collaborate really well and what's happening there? And how do we repeat those things? That's going to give you the actual data that you need to create the environment you say you want.
The thought that's in my mind is, instead of Okay, I'm thinking what I'm actually thinking right now. This moment is last fall when I coached my son's middle school football team. And there was a moment where there was a play that the team offensively, we just struggled to run. And it was funny, I had the play sheet one day and we're at a game and the assistant coach is like, Tyler, why do you have an X on that play? And I'm like, because we can't do it. It's okay. We'll do all the other plays we're phenomenal at. And yet I think about that in this instance of when do we focus on, man, we just got to fix it because we have to be able to do that, instead of saying, no, let's just throw that out the window and do all the things that we do well. That's the thought that's going through my mind. And maybe somebody listening, watching, they're having a similar response. And so I would ask you though, when have you seen those effects of, transformed either in your own life, going from selling radio ads into research or through speaking education, where you saw almost like a similar response as what I just shared?
Yeah. And so, I mean, for me, like writing my first book,
okay,
right? I started thinking, oh, it's not the time to write this book. I don't have my PhD yet. All of these things, all of the lack of what I had. And then I realized I was reading some research, Carol Dweck's work on mindset, growth mindset versus fixed mindset, right?
Yes.
And it's not that nobody's going to read this book. It's that somebody could read this book. And then the other thought is, I don't have anything to say, or I do have certain things to say. I just have to distill what those are. And just that switch, all of a sudden the responsibility comes back onto you. You regenerate the energy. And I felt more energized about it because I was thinking about what are the elements, the positive resources I had to do what I wanted to do, versus thinking about all of the things I needed to fix, which would be a lengthy to-do list and a 15-year journey. And that's an example just right there of how that way of thinking can change everything. But you use a sports analogy, which I love, with that football play, right? I mean, what I would ask a team is, what's the play we run best? Yeah. And let's dissect exactly what each person does and thinks and how you approach that play. And then let's ask ourselves, for this play we're not running well, which of those things that we do well in that play that we do well, which of those things aren't we doing?
Producer Alex, he's going to love this. He played at Baylor, right? Okay. And I'm going to go on a bit of a tangent and he's going to give me notes, and that's okay. We're talking about sports. I'm going to take it a deep further because we can relate it to our public workplaces today and get this connected. Is I absolutely just cannot fathom when you don't see coaches say, hey, I asked the players what they're confident and do well. It's almost the exception where the leader, the coach goes and they come out in the media and they have their press conference and they're like, well, I just went to the players and said, what do they feel best doing? And I'm like, duh. Like, why wouldn't we do that? And so I see this execution, and you see teams execute. And how does it, when someone says, hey, Zach, what do you do best? Through your research, through your experience, what does that do to people?
You're asking me, like, what I do best and what does it do for people?
Yeah.
I mean, I think what I do best is I take research and I distill it in ways that people can understand and they can execute it.
Yeah.
And I think what that does is it enables people to help other people to see their significance and to unleash the good that's within them to get to better.
Yeah.
Right. I also think in the sports analogy, one of the reasons why I was one of the clients I work with is Delta Airlines, and Tom Brady is a spokesperson. Yeah. And Tom Brady was doing a talk. And I was doing a talk at this conference, and Tom Brady said, that whole do your job ethos, it sounds really tough. Like, hey, I need everybody to do your job. But what it's really about is that I need everybody to believe that they matter to the job. And what he says is that before he would go on, he would go to each person and say, I need you to bring this. I need you to bring this today. I need you to bring this today. And he would go around to all his players and say, I need you to bring what's best about what you do today on the field. Right? He didn't go around and saying, hey, make sure you don't do this. Make sure you don't screw this up. Make sure you don't do this. Like he would go up to Julian Edelman, wide receiver, and say, I need you to bring your juice today, Julian, But what I love about this is this idea of like do your job. What that really means is that every single person knows how they uniquely matter.
Mm.
So for example, if you're like going through film, or you're like, if you're a business leader and you're going through your day or what other people do, making sure you're able to point out, hey, here's what I noticed you doing. Here are the strengths you had to do it. Here's how it impacted and was necessary for the bigger whole to come together. And that is, I think, a crucial element of this. It's not just to reveal people's strengths, it's to show them that their strengths uniquely matter.
All right, so let's break down that relationship a little bit. We'll talk about Tom. We'll use Tom and Julian, right? You said the example. So Tom goes to Julian and said, Julian, I need you to bring your juice today. And say, for example, Julian doesn't. He has other thoughts in mind where, his kids are sick. He was, has this thing or that thing, and just things are in his focus that his mindset is not dialed in, which can happen for, you talk about Delta. That could be a pilot. That could be a flight attendant. That could be anyone that has things going on. So in your work, as your experience, those relationships, you have one person that's asking that of another. And say, for example, it doesn't work out that way. How does that interaction go to move forward?
Well, I would first say that I don't know what their interaction was, obviously, after that. But in a thought experiment, I could say that I think the system leading up to that moment would have to be in place to where that person, Julian, for example, or that person that you're talking about, felt noticed by that leader, right? Okay. You can't expect someone to add value until they feel valued.
That's the key.
And that is the key. You can't expect anything to matter to someone who doesn't first believe that they matter to you. I was doing some work with special operations officers, trainers in the officer training, and we were doing work on mattering and making sure every single person feels valued and knows how they add value. And he said to me that the number one predictor of a lethal unit behind enemy lines is not toughness. It is love. Mm-hmm. If I don't know my people's kids' names, if I don't know what they struggle with mentally, if I'm not there for them, helping to lift the load of their life, they are not going to sacrifice for me. We know that care has to come before trust. So the system has to you have to create a system as a leader before you get to that moment of bring the juice, where you care deeply and show that you care for and notice someone in their struggles, in their joys, and the ebbs and flows of people's lives. The big mistake leaders make is they expect people to add value before they feel valued.
It's conditional, right? Whether we talk about conditional love, conditional acceptance, we're making that, conditional. So I want to take from that and step then into, and along the same line, right? It's shifting this into leadership in an organization. It's almost for many years, and you bring up the research by Follett done in your book, and you talk about how she recognized this almost 100 years ago, right? And yet we find that in organizations, it's almost taboo to care. Don't care about your people because then you're attached. And so I want to ask and say, how does this concept that we're talking about, care, mattering, and how can organizations effectively integrate that so it becomes part of their culture, their operations? You talk about system. Like, how do they do that?
Well, first of all, you can't rely on intuition as a leader. Intuition does not scale. So often we've taught people to do the technical things in their leadership, but we've left the things that truly matter to human beings up to chance. We have processes and practices and procedures and skill building for everything that matters in organizations, except what actually matters to human beings. So we have, how much time would you let someone just go out and, operate a piece of machinery with no training? Yet so often we go out and we let people go out and be responsible for where a unique human being spends 1/3 of their life without training on the skills to care. So I think the first thing is to make sure good intentions have good skills, which have good practices. And moving from this common sense idea of showing value to the common practice. I mean, there are 3 major skill areas that are needed to scale care in an organization. The first is that people need to have the skills to notice others, to truly see and hear other people. People have to have the skills to affirm other people, not just to tell people that they matter, but they have to have the skill set to show people exactly how they matter, to show them how their unique strengths make a unique difference. And then third, they have to have the skill set to show people how they're indispensable and necessary. You know, if someone feels replaceable, they will act replaceable. Those three skill areas, right? Noticing, affirming, and needing. How do we make sure that those are scaled as robustly as any other skill set in the organization, across the organization? And that's, I think, where this needs to start. And as you said, why is this so taboo? It's taboo because it's inefficient, and we can make more money in the short term by dehumanizing people.
It's also hard to measure, right?
It's not hard to measure.
Okay.
I can measure someone's experience of mattering. I can measure someone's experience of meaningfulness. I can show you how every lagging indicator that you care about, profit, effects, efficiency, innovation, is a lagging indicator of the leading indicator of human energy. You probably don't need me to measure that, right? So you can completely measure it. I mean, for example, let's talk about innovation in an organization, right?
Okay.
If you want your team to be innovative, they first have to feel like it's a safe environment to experiment and fail, and feel supported by you and be able to share their internal voice and perspectives. Innovation is a lagging indicator, for example, of how safe an environment is.
Sure.
And we can measure psychological safety. So if someone asks me like, "Hey Zach, we need more innovation," I always say to them, I was like, "No, you don't. You need to create a place where people feel safe speaking up, trying, and failing."
I totally accept what you're saying, but I want to take this moment to challenge, because where I say it's hard to do, hard to measure, is because people don't willingly do it. My personal experiences, and I'm thinking of workplaces, I'm thinking of, and play out this story where it's kind of like exactly what you're saying. It's like the body language tells you everything you need to know. But unless someone is sitting there critiquing, oh, Zach's walking in with his head down, he's kind of frowning, he's avoiding people, that's not okay, we made 6 sales today, measurable, that shows up on a spreadsheet. Somebody has to look for that and recognize it. And so that, to me, I completely agree with you. Those are all the leading indicators. But organizationally, or as we teach, as we, again, and it's been my experience, it's been my life, and I love the intersection of sports and work, is in sports, you can watch a football team or a basketball team, a baseball team, a soccer team, and you say, oh, dude, they're not going to do well because their body language tells everything. But yet we accept that it's hard to measure, because why aren't we doing it?
So one of the reasons, and it's a brilliant point that you bring up, is that people don't have the skill to fully see people. For example, you had the great example. Someone comes in, they're frowning, they're down. Let's do an example. Like someone comes in and says, oh, you say, hey, how was the meeting with the sales team? And the person says, it was good. It was good. It was a good meeting. What's your next cue? Well, you're likely your next cue is to either move on with the conversation, say what was good about it, or something like that. But say someone else comes in, same content, you ask, how was the sales meeting? And they're like, oh, we finally got that darn sales meeting done.
Yeah.
Right? The same content did the sales meeting, 2 different meanings, right? One of the key skills is to listen for total meaning. So, for example, if you just say, oh, that's great, like move on with your day, that person feels misunderstood. Versus if you say, there's frustration in that person's voice, saying something like, hey, it sounds like that meeting was frustrating for you. What was going on in it? And all of a sudden that person feels heard. That is a skill, right? And that is a skill that many leaders don't have. They can't distinguish the person who comes in and goes, the sales meeting was good. And the sales meeting, oh man, that finally got through that sales meeting, right? Yeah. And they miss out on all this data to notice their people. And then the lagging indicators of performance and commitment and productivity and engagement suffer based on the accumulation of these missed moments of opportunities to understand someone else.
What would you call that skill?
That skill, I call it listening for total meaning.
To me, that's
being
empathy.
able to actually help someone feel heard. So the meaning, being able to notice the cue, the meaning behind the word, the nonverbal cue,
Yeah.
then being able to dig into that and acknowledge the feelings, and also being able to attend to all cues of like nonverbals and how someone is saying something gives you the opportunity to invite that person's true voice to feel heard.
And I think about what you do today at Colorado State, and I'm wondering, all right, you see the result in college, we see the result in workplace, but where does this education need to start? Like, is it something needs to start in elementary school? Is it you wait until someone, wants to be farther advanced in their career, like an MBA, doctorate level, or like, does it need to start in our workplaces so it transcends into our families and our communities? Like, where does this need to start? Because the problem, it's almost documented 100-year-old plus problem, and yet it's not working. And it was like, oh boy, as you talk about, you're invited into companies because people are like, there's a problem here. So I'll rephrase it. Where does this need to start?
Wherever you are, it needs to start. Okay. I mean, because you can't, I think wherever you are, I believe that any human being can relearn how to be a human being to other people. They can relearn.
Whoa. Can you restate that? Because that I might have missed that, and I want you to restate that because I think it's powerful.
I think any human being, no matter where you are, can relearn how to be a human being to other human beings. And what I mean by that is noticing, seeing people, hearing people, affirming people, showing people around us that we're needed. The reason why I say relearn is because many people now in a dominant frame have been taught, and they don't know that they've been taught, but have been socialized to communicate in transactions. Whether you're using Slack, whether you're using text messages, whether you're using any other like social media or Quora or Reddit, wherever. Those are one-sided transactions. We've been taught to shout statements back and forth. What has happened is any skill that you don't use withers. Okay. So the skill to see somebody in front of you in a dynamic conversation and hear somebody, to point out someone's unique strengths and gifts and the nuances of that, to show someone their impact, to show someone how they're needed, is a skill that we had. I mean, for example, if you go back to like hunter-gatherer societies, there was no word for drudgery. There was no word for like boredom in work. Right? We worked together. There was a lot of words for joy. There was a lot of words for connection. And I think it's going back to fundamentally how we interact with each other that we've been stripped of that through communicating in transactions. A lot of people say to me, Zach, the future of leadership is technological, and it's not. It's interactional. Because as more and more people learn how to communicate via transactions, the ability to be able to make the person in front of you feel seen, heard, valued, and understood is going to be a coveted skill set. Mm-hmm. And where does this start? I think it starts with our kids, obviously. It starts when I was at my kindergartner's open house night. I noticed all of the values of hearing others, listening, respect on their walls. And I had this realization in my own work. I'm like, man, I just teach adults kindergarten, right? But something happens along the way, like from those initial skills that we learn how to be a human being. And what happens is that we're taught to communicate in transactions. We're taught to acquire and achieve for ourselves. We're taught that our worth is inherently dependent on what we do or what we don't do. And over time, we become acquirers, achievers, and self-helpers, but we haven't regenerated the ecosystem to make sure that everybody around us feels significant.
One of the things that I believe here is like so much of what you're talking about, to go to the extent that I believe and agree with you that as AI becomes more and more and more and more a part of our life, the need for healthy, human-based leadership is greater, not less. But I also recognize through myself, through the trauma that I had to deal with, the armors that I put on to just get through life is what made me forget about being a human. Or I put
Absolutely.
I conditioned so I could survive and just move forward in life. And so as I'm thinking about this myself and what I hear from you, and absolutely, but it's like, how do we take this idea of positive psychology? And then we have to understand that people are going to have circumstances, challenges, adversities, and we have to build resilience through it, as you talked about, not embracing, the drudgery, but like, it's a great opportunity, because not just me, everyone has insecurities. Everyone has gone through some type of adversity and trauma. And so how do we enter in at those places and say, it's okay, now let's move forward and build this new tool, this skill, this tool, because we need to get back to, or we need to find that place of being human first.
The problem is you or other individuals have had to do too much on your own.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is that
it's great.
Our system, you're right, has put too much work on the individual that was never meant to be there. For example, there's no such thing as self-actualization. Maslow's pyramid, even in his later years, he critiqued it. There's no such thing because, in order to, you don't procure, like look at the bottom of the pyramid, you don't procure food and safety, for yourself.
Yeah.
You don't procure belonging for yourself. Esteem building, like your esteem is the confidence in your own worth. You can't, contrary to popular opinion, sit there and say, hey, I believe in myself, and actually have that last. Right? In order to develop self-esteem, you have to be in an environment that shows you the realistic evidence of your significance. To develop your belief in yourself relies on others. Like the pathway up to Maslow's self-actualization is completely reliant on others. The problem is that we've over-indexed on someone needing to help themselves. Oh, you've gone through trauma? Read this book about how to deal with your trauma. Or go to this seminar or workshop on how to deal with your trauma, versus how do we make sure the environment around us is lightening the load for the individual?
Yeah.
How are we carrying one another's burdens? How are we creating an ecosystem to where there doesn't need to be so much self-help? Like the self-help industry relies on the fact that no one's coming to help you. What if that wasn't the case? I think that our environment has over-indexed on the work the individual needs to do, which is there, totally there, and under-indexed the role in society and community as responsible for an individual's well-being.
I'd love to believe that we have to do the work alone, but not on your own. And to that extent, what you're saying is like, no one else, you can't do it for me, but it'll be more effective and longer lasting if we do it together.
But I can make it easier.
Totally, exactly. And that's where collectively doing it together, or by having different information, we can make it easier, but still have to do it on your own, but it's more effective with others. Is my belief.
Yeah, like say if I did the work, like I did individual work on how to like discover my purpose, right? And live more purposefully, like discover my contribution. But then say I go into an environment every day that shows me that I'm not worthy of contributing. Every day, day in and day out. Very soon, I will become someone who doesn't believe that I have purpose. And this is what happens, right? If you put a well individual, say we rehabilitate an individual, you put a well individual into an unwell system, they will eventually become an unwell individual. It's the principle of toxicity. If you put any organism that's well, you rehabilitate them, you have them do the work,
the bad
put them into a toxic environment, the individual sadly eventually becomes toxic themselves.
Yeah.
This is what we've been doing with human beings in personal development over the last 20 years. Is we've rehabilitated individuals with all of these resilience programs, toughness programs, everything, which are great. But we haven't changed how we relate to one another to create the environment that makes it easier and sustains all that work. And that's this work. That's this work of making sure everybody feels like they matter. making sure everybody feels significance.
So for someone maybe listening to this, and this is like, it gives them a different perspective. They've heard this for the first time in a way. I've heard it many times, but this is the first time in this way, this thought, this mindset. Like, what practical advice would you offer for them to start incorporating it into their life, into their workplace, into everything they're doing?
Yeah. One, I advocate a purposeful mindset. And you can do this in a number of ways. Like, one is what I call developing a so that mentality. Like a lot of the people, we did research with janitors on the front line, people in difficult work, often degraded work, often invisible work. And one of the things that we found when we researched how they, like you talked about, made it through, they all had some variation of what I call a so that mentality. If a janitor was going in and cleaning a bathroom on a Monday morning, one of the janitors told me that they say to themselves, I'm cleaning this bathroom so that these kids don't get sick, right? They were able to link whatever it is that they're doing with its inevitable impact. So one thing I think you could do is start developing that so that perspective. In a world that tells you every day to focus on yourself, focus on the impact you make. And you will understand yourself better. I'm doing this so that what? I'm having this next meeting so that what? And what's the impact you want to make? What is your so that? I think that's number one. I think number two is ask better questions of yourself. Instead of what do I have to do today? How is what I'm going to do today going to impact other people? Instead of what should I do with my life? What do I want my life to do for other people? Instead of what should my job be? What should my next job be? What kind of impact do I want to have made in 5 years?
Yeah.
Those things will help you see your strengths and see the impact you want to make. And you'll start recalibrating this perspective of, wow, I'm not like a helpless individual that doesn't matter. Like, I can't not matter to the next person I talk to. And that mindset is really critical. And then the second half of this is make it easier for people to see their own significance, their own so that. Through, for example, learning things like asking better questions instead of how are you? What is your attention today? What are you most excited about today? Instead of saying thank you to somebody, say, hey, I noticed you have these strengths and it made this difference for me. One thing you can do is use these 5 words to someone in your life, someone in your organization that you rely on. If it wasn't for you, this wouldn't be possible, and see what happens. So develop the purposeful mindset. And then think about these skills that you can make it easier for people to see their own significance on a daily basis around you. And then watch the lagging indicators, come into play. I mean, imagine a society, imagine an organization in which every single person deeply believes that they are valued and know exactly how they add value.
I love it. And it's honestly, I mentioned the alignment that I have. And to me, what you've described is this journey to be an impact-driven leader, is because that's what it is to me. I so appreciate it. One final question, Zach, is where can people learn more about you, your work, what you're doing to really, again, as you, Brett, we're all in this together, but either as a tip of the spear, as a part of the front line, where can they learn more about you and your work again?
Yeah, I mean, you can go to my website, zachmercurio.com. I also really enjoy LinkedIn, to be honest with you. Like, there's a really great community there of people who are actually doing real work and making this change in organizations. So it's really fun to learn about people there. I'm at Zach Mercurio there. We also have a new book coming out in 2025. It's going to be called Mattering Comes First. It's all about the science and practice of how nothing really matters to someone who doesn't first believe that they matter, and how care and experiencing significance is a prerequisite for everything else. So join us in that movement. And I mean, and my goal is that these are not programs. They're not initiatives. They're not big assessments. They're interpersonal skills that we can learn and implement anywhere.
I love it. Thank you so much for your time. And thank you for everyone watching, listening. Remember to subscribe on YouTube and wherever you listen to podcasts. You can help more people discover by impactful leaders like Zach by rating and reviewing each episode. So until next time, choose to lead with impact and purpose. Thank you for being here.